What's going on, guys? Thank you so much for joining our third episode of MazCast. I am joined by the usual suspects. Say hello, Rune and Bloom.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing well.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us.
And we are joined today. Our special guest is going to be Gaia Legend. Say hello, Gaia.
Hello there.
Gaia has been around. He's one of the YouTube OGs, as in, I believe that you've had your channel since YouTube started.
Yes, that is correct.
That was what, 2005, correct?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
That is insane. Tell us a little bit about your channel, Gaia.
Well, basically, my channel is all about gaming, of course. I started a long time ago with my channel, but in the beginning, I started actually with the paranormal. That's also one of the things I am into. But later on, I just decided to do a Let's Play, because back then people used to do Let's Plays as well, especially blind Let's Plays, which is to be one of my favorite things as well. And from there, I just started to go and play more video games, and eventually I tried to do all kinds of different video games. For example, Secret of Mana, which happens to be one of my favorite games of all time. That's what I started with. But yeah, the paranormal was first the thing I was actually starting with before I decided to go on with video games. But I did do both of them at the same time. Yeah, which was interesting because nobody back then had ever heard of an EVP, for example, which stands for electrical voice phenomenon, which means that if you record stuff, then you might hear voices on your recordings that are not from yours or somebody that you know of. And yeah, I decided maybe 5-6 EVPs later, that's when I was like, you know what? I don't think this is the right path to go. And that's when I started my Let's Plays. And it has never changed any since then, basically. That's how it was since then.
And Gaia, you have a pretty interesting name. I remember back in the day, there was a game called Illusion of Gaia. It was a game that I played on the Super Nintendo. Did that in any way inspire the name of your channel?
Well, the inspiration comes from that I love mythology. That's what I love the most. I like history as well. So that also, of course, combines with mythology. And the first thing that back then when I had my first PS1, I just played all these games Japanese role-playing games and so on. And I also started, of course, with the Super Nintendo, like you mentioned. But back then I was thinking about a certain name and I was like, you know what? Gaia is a pretty nice name to have. And when I, for the first time ever had a PS3, I started to make an account, which was Gaia Legend. And later on, I thought, you know what? I'm going to change my YouTube channel into that same name so I can basically combine them with everything else that I have with my social media and so on. And has been like that ever since. So you can say that it's a pretty old name, yeah, and it is pretty unique. Except for now, there's a lot of people that are trying to use the name now too nowadays. I think there's even a conspiracy site nowadays that's called Gaia. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it's pretty unique to a lot of people. Not many people are using it. That is true.
So in light of your explanation on why you named yourself Gaia Legend, you said that you had changed it to Gaia Legend.
Yes.
What was the original name of your channel?
My front and my last name.
Gotcha.
My first and front name. So that's what I first had. And later on when Google Plus came around, I had to change everything. So I did, and I just changed my other channel because eventually I had two, and I changed it to Gaia Legend, and it hasn't changed anything. So if you check my channel's name and the way when it was updated back then, it's from 2012.
Right.
But the channel is a lot older than that.
Well, we're not gonna ask you what your first and last name is on the channel, but it's definitely interesting that you've been with YouTube since the beginning of YouTube, which is, you don't see that very often nowadays, especially with the way YouTube has been. It's discouraged a lot of creators, and that includes small, medium, and large channels as well. So it's really cool to have you on here with us, Gaia. I really do appreciate it. Last question about your channel, though. What inspired you to start a YouTube channel in the first place?
Games. Yeah, that was the first thing that inspired me was basically when I saw other people playing games, and I have a lot of knowledge if it's about games, and I was like, back then there weren't that many that used to play the games that I used to play, so I wanted to share my knowledge that I have with other people and entertain them to the point that if their life just sucks or whatever, I just basically wanted to make them smile. Yeah, I wanted to give them a good day. I wanted to make them laugh, and with that, combine that with games, and then basically, yeah, that was my plan. It was my plan to share it all with the world, and that was YouTube. YouTube was the thing back then. Now you've got many other platforms, but in the beginning, it was just YouTube, and that was it.
Guys, if you guys have yet to check out Gaia Legend, please check out his YouTube channel. His link is going to be in the description below here. You had mentioned that you were very knowledgeable when it comes to games. I'm looking at these remakes that Capcom is doing of Resident Evil. Back January 25th, 2019, they released the remake of Resident Evil, which was wildly popular. Resident Evil 2 was one of those games when it first came out that it was one of the more popular ones because it was more scarce than 1. It was more scarce than 3 and even 4. And now it's back out as a remake. They did a great job with that. Fast forward to April 3rd, 2020, and we've got the release of Resident Evil 3, which is a fantastic version of the Resident Evil series as well. But in my personal opinion, and I'll ask you guys about your opinions here in a minute, Resident Evil 4 to me is like the perfect Resident Evil game. It still has the claustrophobia from the first 3 iterations, but moving forward, it gave it a little bit more of a cult feel. It gave it like that small village. We went from the G and T virus to Las Plagas. Now we're hearing that there's going to be a remake of Resident Evil 4. Gaia, what are your thoughts on a remake of Resident Evil 4?
I think it's too early for this. I think that it is really too early. The reason is that remakes are cool, they are fine, but the thing is, Resident Evil 4 is not that old yet compared to all the other games. Yeah, there's like 10 years apart between all the others. And I think that it's just not necessary to change all this. To be fair, if you look back at the other remakes, they were too short. People are complaining now that it's just all way too short, which I believe it's really the case that it's really too short. And because they've put a $60, I think it was a $60 price tag on it, it's just not worth it for that specific price tag. If you would say like maybe 20 or 30, then I would say okay. But for a $60 game, that makes no sense to me. Because the remakes are awesome. The graphics are amazing and so on. But if you compare it to like story-wise and the games that we can have today, it's just too short. Too easy and too short. I think there's even people that are playing this game out in speedruns and stuff in maybe less than like 15 to 10 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible how fast the speedruns are. I'm not really sure if it's 10 or 15, but it is very short. I know that. Back then, when you wanted to play, let's say Resident Evil 2, the original one on the PlayStation 1, that like the speedrun I used to do, I think I played that game like when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I played the game out for like in 2 hours. And now you can do these remakes that should actually be open world, larger, bigger. You have more things to do, more things you can collect and so on. And you can play this game out in 15 minutes. I mean, that's just way too much for me to enjoy a game like that, because basically the Resident Evil series are jewels, to me at least. I'm a big fan of those. And I just can't understand why these remakes are just too short. And I think the reason why they did that is because of the graphic style. I think that's the reason why. So they've put the graphics into it, make it extremely good looking, but in return, you don't have really that much content to go through. I think that's the difference between all the other games. That's what I think. What the problem is with these remakes. Anybody
have anything they want to add?
I've been looking over a few playthroughs of the Resident Evil remake, and in all honesty, I think it looks brilliant. It just looks so good. You've got the bump mapping on the skin, the specular lighting on the skin. The heroine or protagonist, whatever you want to call her, in one sequence she had an abrasion on her shoulder, and you could actually see quite clearly where the wound had scraped the dermis but not penetrated the skin. And further on it had penetrated the skin and there was significant damage there. But the way they'd actually done this, mapped it out onto the skin for that specific instance, it was very, very realistic. Water quality, rain on the water, They look superb. Even the flame effects. I'm actually looking at a screenshot while I'm blibbering on here. And honestly, the corridor burning and, well, I'm not going to give much away, but in case somebody's going to play it, oh, well, this happens in this sequence and this. But the actual flames look incredibly realistic. I'm just wondering if they're actually photographic quality or photorealistic, rather. To be quite honest, probably going to get lynched by film companies now saying this, but I actually find watching a playthrough of the Resident Evil games more entertaining than actually watching the movies.
They are.
Sorry, but I do.
No, you're absolutely right.
It's the gameplay is a lot more interesting and a lot more dynamic and explosive. And I think the voice actors that they've selected for this, the voice actors are superb as well. I can't find a fault and say, oh, well, this voice actor's rubbish and this one's quite good, but this one, they are very, very good. I mean, it is a quality game, and the remaster of it is very nice. I do like it. In fact, I'm going to actually purchase it when the price drops a bit.
There you go. And I would agree with you on the graphics. The graphics are definitely cutting edge for sure. And one thing that I kind of agree with you on that guy is there's a pretty big gap between Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 in terms of when the game was released, of course. I think it was 1999 was Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 4 was in 2005. So there was a 2-year gap between 2 and 3 and a 6-year gap between 3 and 4. However, that's 17 years ago at this point. I would be ready for a remake of Resident Evil 4, personally speaking, of course. But one thing that I did say when I was talking about Resident Evil 4 is that is one of the more perfect games. It's the first game that, if you remember, it's the first game in the series that did the over-the-shoulder shooter. There were some things that were missing. You couldn't move while you were aiming. The aiming trigger was on the wrong side, and there was no way for you to remap it to the other side. I aim with my right stick, and I walk with the left stick. But you walk and stop and aim with the left stick in the original version, and in the remakes on consoles. Now, I was able to remap it when I got it on PC, which was nice. But other than a couple of things like that, I'm kind of afraid to see a remake. I mean, how much are they going to change it? Is it going to be too short? Are they going to take the puzzles out? Are they going to make new puzzles? M2 Studio is a new developer since about 2018, and they are going to be in the driver's seat. They assisted with Resident Evil 3, the remake. They're in the driver's seat for Resident Evil 4, according to Capcom. How do you guys think having an iconic game like this would do with a brand new developer that's not even 2 full years old?
Well, to be fair, I think it will all be all right. But this is the thing. Yes, like this might be an unpopular opinion. I actually love the old PlayStation 1 control in the way how you control the basically the character and walking around and going through the corridors and stuff. I still miss that till this day. And for me, the remakes are amazing. They look great, and I love it. And this has nothing to do with nostalgia or whatever. It's just that I cannot get used in the way how the third person view is for most of these games these days. And I can refer, for example, to the way how Fortnite is. It kind of reminds me of that view. It reminds me of how that character walks around, and it's basically the same thing. Instead of walking through into the person's eyes and then walk around like a first-person shooter, you look over the shoulder of your character, and I really do not like that at all. To be fair, it's not my style. I still remember the ways how the cameras were like in the corners of your screen, and sometimes you couldn't see the character, for example, walking behind a certain wall because the camera was static. You couldn't move it or whatever. So sometimes when you walk like through a corridor, you can see your character for a little bit. But for some reason, that's the play style that I miss, which is I was really happy with when Resident Evil Outbreak came out, which, to be honest, needs a remake too. Yeah, I'm just saying. And the thing is that I just miss that play style. It's like everybody just forgotten about it. And yeah, I miss it because Code Veronica X also had that specific play style. And I just miss it. That was my thing. So I do think that Resident Evil 4 will be successful for everybody. It will probably be just as amazing as all the other games, all the other remakes that have been coming up. But do I think it's going to be short again? I think it will be. And the reason for that is lots of people nowadays want to be scared, wants to have these things popping up in your face,
Hmm.
which takes a lot of energy for the developers to make. And the graphics are going to be amazing too, of course, but they have to downgrade the content for this. The
Yeah.
problem is for me is that the content would just not be that good enough for me to enjoy the game totally. So if I will go for A to B to C to D, then it will be over. And then I could just basically place the game on my shelf here and never play it again. While the other games from back then, let's say, for example, Resident Evil Outbreak, are a bit different because I can still do different things in that game. Like I could probably just like pick a certain difficulty, let's say a hard or easy or normal or whatever. But the difference between those two games, it's not linear, as in the item placement is different and so on, unless you make a randomizer or something like that out of it. But otherwise, that's the things that I love about the older Resident Evil games. It's just something that I missed. There is something in those remakes that are not in the PS1 games. And the PS1 games are my favorite of all time, especially Survivor. That's also an unpopular opinion. I actually like Survivor. I just played it last week.
Well, I think that Gaia is probably right that there is going to be another one, and they'll probably match it like all the other remakes. But I say that if they do remake 4, I did play 46 minutes of it, but I don't have a controller that works with it on the computer. So I was using the keyboard and mouse, and those controls are janky compared to what I'm used to for the controls, because you can't use the mouse to look around. You have to look around by pressing the keys in order to look right. You got to hit the D key to look right. And if you're walking and you want to go around the corner, well, you have to make sure you're hitting W and D at the same time or what have you. So it's like, that's kind of janky in my opinion for the keyboard and mouse. So I hope that they would be able to get it so that if someone doesn't have a Xbox controller, that they would be able to use one of the newer PlayStation controllers with it. That would be wonderful, because I think it's more meant for a controller type play than a keyboard and mouse.
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest with you, when they first came out with Resident Evil, I think they really had the console in mind when it came to that, especially if you go back to Resident Evil 1, it was the up was forward, left and right turned you left or right. You could back up, but no matter what direction your character was facing, up was forward. So you could actually turn your character completely around, and you would have to press up on the D-pad, because if you remember, the original PlayStation did not have DualShock. There were no sticks. That came later, but when it first came out, it was just the D-pad, the select start button, and your 4 buttons, and then of course your 4 triggers on up on the top. But up was forward, and that was very confusing when it first came out. And I remember getting it, and it was like, oh, what the hell is this? It took me a good while to understand how to run that, because I'd never played a game with those types of controls before. But yeah, I would definitely agree with you that I don't think I would even attempt to try a Resident Evil game on a keyboard and mouse based on those types of mechanics. Maybe today, nowadays, like from Resident Evil 5, 6, 7, that's more with keyboard and mouse in mind as an option. But I would definitely say the first 4 of them had no intention of really thinking about what the PC players would want. I could be wrong.
Well, I think you're right, but just what I've played on it, it's just, I was doing fine on, being able to stop what I'm doing to aim the gun and shoot them if there was like up to 3 people coming at me. But when I'm getting a horde, I'm like, I can't move to look to see where my next person's coming from. Okay, I'm dead. Oh my gosh, I even got my head cut off. So, I mean,
that's how it works. I mean, that's just a thing.
What was also revolutionary, and this just kind of makes me feel old, which is back then on the PS1 with Resident Evil 2, like how you had to aim and all the stuff was a bit clunky. But then when Resident Evil 3 came out, it was very revolutionary to walk around with forward and then pressing on circle, and that way your character would just turn around very fast.
Yes.
Out of nowhere. And people were like, wow, that's so cool. That's something new. And I was like, it's just a button difference. It's just forward and circle, and it makes your character move, like spin like crazy to run away very quickly as fast as possible. And it's just funny, like that back then was new, was something revolutionary.
Yeah, one thing that I can definitely say for the Resident Evil series is that their controls have evolved nicely with each iteration. They didn't try to just keep it the same from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, so on and so forth. And they always kept the content fresh up until about Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 is still a good game. I actually really enjoyed it, but we got a little bit more into taking the claustrophobia away, open world type. There were some situations in Resident Evil 5 where, there were some close quarters and whatnot. But the one thing that really turned me off, and something they really ran with in Resident Evil 6, was handing these zombies guns. And that just isn't a thing in my mind. When I think of zombies, I'm thinking the George Romero, those types of zombies, the mindless walkers and everything like that. You hand one of those types of zombies a gun, they're going to try to eat it. They're not going to shoot at you. They're supposed to be reanimated, undead, mindless monsters, right? And
I agree.
They kind of took that away with 5 and 6. And one thing that I have never forgotten after 5 is kind of like they didn't do it too much with 5, so you could kind of look past it. It's almost like just like one area where they were just shooting at you. And you're like, well, this is kind of stupid, but well, whatever. It did go away. But then you go to Resident Evil 6, and I remember it to this day. They're sitting there saying, Capcom comes out and says, we promise you the best Resident Evil game in the series yet. And then they dropped this Resident Evil 6 on us. That really had a lot of gunplay in it. There was no claustrophobia anymore. There was no suspense. You had some real-time events, which a lot of people don't like real-time events. I don't have a problem with real-time events. Too many of them, though, I have a problem with, which kind of started veering that direction. I think the best thing that Capcom could have done was reboot the entire series with Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. I think that kind of brought it back to the claustrophobia, kind of brought it back to the unknown, kind of made you nervous playing it. It kind of disgusted you playing it with some of the scenery. The family that you're stuck with in that game, in that house, is terrible. So I think they kind of brought it back full circle. I like the idea of what they're doing with the remakes in terms of, 2 came out, 3 came out. They're talking about releasing 4. What happens after we get the remakes done? Are we done with Resident Evil completely, or are we going to rewrite it from 3 on or from 4 on?
That is probably something that they're going to do, yeah. I think after the remakes, they're probably thinking like, oh, we're kind of done with this now. Because we've done what everybody wanted to have, which is the audience was always asking for a remake for years, and now they finally gotten it. So I think after this, I don't think they're going to make any more remakes after this. I think they're kind of done with it, and maybe there's going to be a Resident Evil 8 or something like that. But yeah, I think that's the case, yes.
But does Resident Evil 8 take off from Resident Evil 7, or does it take off from Resident Evil 4? Because, it went off the rails in 5 and 6. It really kind of got away from the lore and the canon, if you agree. But I liked the way that it was going. And if you look at the movies and everything like that had come out since, a lot of those kind of stuck with Leon and Chris Redfield and everything like that. But we kind of veered off and added some new characters in 6 and kind of just went off the rails and completely off the storyline.
Yeah, I've got to say about the movies. The first 2 are okay. I still had some issues with the second movie, Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
But to be fair, I find the movies to be a disgrace to the entire series. The first movie was okay. I really loved the music, especially because back then I think it was Marilyn Manson that did all the soundtrack of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, 2 came up, and I kind of had the issue with Nemesis. Nemesis, the first time I saw him, I was like, man, this thing looks he looks so cool. But then this scene came up when they were fighting against each other, Alice versus him. And that's when I was like, okay, this makes absolutely no sense. It's just the way how they were fighting. It was more like a kung fu movie with Jackie Chan than it was really a serious zombie movie where I was expected to be scared of the zombies and everything that was happening around in the entire movie. But instead, I was basically, I don't know, I was just watching Shrek fighting against some girl, and that's about it. I just didn't like it at all.
Well, I agree with you. I think you can blame The Matrix when that came out. It came out a little bit before these movies came out, and that was super popular. It was one of the more revolutionary blockbuster hits in a long time at that point. And a lot of people tried emulating that in their movies and their iterations, and I think that was kind of a byproduct of it. If you ask me with the first Resident Evil, I've said it before, but if you had slapped a different name on that movie, I wouldn't have known it was supposed to be a Resident Evil movie. I mean, it's just the characters in it didn't make sense. They weren't from the games initially. No. They had this underground bunker called the Hive, which they never talk about the Hive in the first 2 or 3 games.
I think they've gotten that idea from Veronica Code X, where the laboratory there, I think it was called the Hive as well. I think they've got the idea there, but they just confused a couple of them and then mixed them up. And that's why there were so many things that made no sense. For example, the Alice character, that was just a new add-on character for the series because they had to start somewhere.
Right.
And the liquor is also in the movie, and that eventually changes and mutates into a new one, which they have to fight against in that train scene, I believe. So there were a couple of things, but other than that, if you're no fan, you would have known a lot about it from that movie.
Well, here's the problem I have with that, though, because Resident Evil, the movie, was released on March 12th, 2002. Code Veronica X didn't come out until September 2011.
On the PS2, right? I believe.
On the PS2.
I thought Code Veronica X was supposed to be Resident Evil 4, but they changed it and then decided to update it later, but I'm not really sure.
Right. So the only thing that I can think of is that they were adding, it was Code Veronica X that far in production in 2002. That's the only one, like what you just said there makes the most sense, because if that was in 2002, and that was supposed to be Resident Evil 4, then they would have had that storyline already and probably just extrapolated it from what was coming out 3 years later, and adding the Hive and everything like that. But then again, this was pushed back 9 years. A movie that has the Hive in it comes out 9 years after they used the Hive in the movie. I'm not sure which one inspired which, for one. Yes. Two, I think that, and the liquor came, we were introduced to the liquor in Resident Evil 2. So that one made sense. But I just found it kind of weird that they just kind of slapped some characters for the movie only, added the Hive at that point, which we hadn't heard of in 1 or 2 at that point, or 3 really. But when I look at
it, with that sense, I believe the reason why they did this is because back then they weren't that good enough with making movies from games. So there was a little knowledge of what was happening in the series, and they basically made a movie from there, and not really giving a crap about it any more than that. So, like for example, if a movie now comes out and it will be given a game, then the game has to be perfect, or otherwise people are going to riot on Twitter. But back then it wasn't that good enough yet. I think that's the reason why they confused everything around it, and then later on, because you have to think this way, you've got Resident Evil 3 and Nemesis in that game, but we have the second movie and Nemesis in that movie. So you see how fast they've made. You've got the second movie with Nemesis in it, but actually Nemesis is from Resident Evil 3.
Right.
They should have done it differently. They should have made a movie, the movie 1 with the mansion, the second movie with Raccoon City, and then the third movie that still happens in Raccoon City, but then Nemesis arrives. That's the only way where I could say, like, okay, this makes sense. But we only, as fans, know exactly what's going on in these movies, because we've grown up with it, we've played the games, we know exactly what was happening everywhere. But for a new person that's going to watch these movies right now, they think that Resident Evil 5 would be expected to be in movie 5 or something like that. But instead, things are happening in those movies, and people are probably like, wait, what? Who's this? Wait, who's that? What's this? What's that? They have no idea, unless they're big fans of this, which we are.
Exactly. But I completely disagree with you about they didn't know how to make movies about inspired by games back then. I thought Super Mario Brothers was fantastic. I think that Bob Hoskins was the best Mario ever, and John Leguizamo as Luigi, forget about it. And let's add Dennis Hopper as a non-lizard Koopa.
Yeah.
I'm in!
Yeah, I remember that movie.
Unfortunately, me too. And how about Street Fighter? Guile, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme. M. Bison
Yay.
by the one, the only, super huge, jacked up Raul Julia.
Oh dear, no.
But I missed that movie though. To be fair, lots of people disliked that movie, but I really liked it as a kid. Really, I did.
Could I just point out that we lost two great actors that practically in a very short period of time. And Raul Julia, his swan song was Street Fighter. And that is the saddest epitaph for a really good actor.
Completely agree with you.
The Addams Family. Dun-dun-dun-dun.
I will say that Raul Julia was by far, and nobody will ever do a better Gomez Adams than him. He did brilliant in both of them. I don't think they didn't do a third one with. They just kind of like, hey, you know what? Let's just do a new cast. So I was actually looking at some of the questions that Discord members had posted and wanted to ask some questions here. What is the scariest game you have ever played, Bloom? Let me start with you on that one.
Oh my goodness, I don't really scare easily, so I don't think I've actually had a scariest game, though I can tell you I've had a few jump scares in Fallout 3 with the mutant things that are in there, the variety of things, and not knowing they were there until it all of a sudden spits at you or hits you or shoots you. But that was probably the only thing that actually has scared me in any game so far.
I always go back to one that I found fundamentally disturbing on a lot of levels for some reason, and that's called Canorium. It's based on H.P. Lovecraft. A few stories actually, it's not just the one. So if you've read, hang on, I can't actually point out the books that it's actually based on because it might give away some of the plot in case you want to play it. But trust me, it's very good, and it is heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. As I say, they couldn't actually just come out and say, oh, this is a H.P. Lovecraft game and it's called, again, the title of the book, because another company had already applied for copyright on a title of a book, and we're pushing that out. But this, if you're a H.P. Lovecraft fan, get this, very disturbing, very dark, very good. I like it.
I played that game last month, by the way.
What do you think of it?
I finished it. Well, to me, it wasn't all that scary, but I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a really fun game to play.
Oh, come on, you must have found it disturbing on some level, like I say. I mean, it's not like a jump scare type game. I'll agree with that straight away.
Not at all, no. It's more like if you're on drugs, but then 5 times worse. Sounds like that.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done. And I've read Lovecraft's books numerous times.
Oh, Lovecraft is awesome. I've listened to a lot of podcasts about him. So he's got some really creepy, dark stories that he can tell, and it's just, I love it. I just soak them in and like, yes, this is my jam right here. Yes.
Have you guys seen the latest movie Underwater? Apparently, in that movie, it's about Cthulhu rising up
right.
from down below. The makers of the movie said that it was supposed to be Cthulhu in his earlier stages, and the deep ones, I think, are in there as well. So I highly suggest, if you like Lovecraft, that you check that one out.
Oh, definitely. If I may give a plug for a radio play, well, a radio serialization, not a play, is The Shadow over Innsmouth. It was a BBC production, and it's currently on YouTube, and it's read by Richard Coyle, and it's well worth having a listen to. It lasts about 2 hours, something like that, and it's so worth listening to. Even if you're doing something else or just settling down, going to sleep, just put that on your iPad or your whatever and just listen to it. It's very, very well done.
When I was a child, I used to play a game called Alone in the Dark, A New Nightmare. And I was playing that for like 5 minutes. And then eventually I felt something in my stomach where I thought, I think it's time to change my pants. Because I was so scared of what just happened 5 minutes before that.
Scariest game I've ever played is Alone in the Dark, and it made me poop.
It was a 3,000 change game.
I sure hope you wore your brown pants.
No courtesy flush.
Break up my brown trousers, Bosun. It's a good one tonight.
That's
Because
too
the
funny.
thing was, the game basically has a lot of jump scares in it, but it's kind of random. So like you're walking in a certain hallway, and nothing is happening there, and then you go just like Resident Evil, you go into a door, and the game has to load it up, and between those loading screens, things can happen. So, for example, you open up a door, you go to a different corridor, a different area, and nothing happens. Then you decide, like, maybe I need to go back. I have done something, maybe I haven't done something yet, so I need to go back. So you go back into the door, and all of a sudden, a certain demonic scream or something like that just pops up out of nowhere very loudly, because for some reason, these sounds are louder than the soundtrack behind, basically the soundtrack of the game itself. So the BGM is just like very softly, you can hear that, but those screams and stuff are like a lot like crazy. So imagine you being like 8, 9 years old. You're playing this game for the very first time in the dark, as I always play these games in the dark. Yeah, you're alone. You're like, oh, well, it's probably not that bad of a scary game. And then all of a sudden, a thing just shows up and you crap your pants. Well, that's basically what happened when I was a kid.
And have you played it since then, Gaia, or did you learn?
Yes, because I'm not somebody that gives up. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go and complete this game. And I eventually did. There's 2 paths that you can take. There's Aline, which is kind of the easier way of the game. That's basically easy mode. You've got, what's his name? The other guy, what's his name? Can't really remember it right now. But he is basically the hard version of the game. So there's this easy path and a hard path. And that's basically how the game is. It's kind of like Resident Evil 2 that has scenario A and scenario B. It's basically the same thing. Because there's also different pathways and different puzzles in each scenario and so on. Edward, that's his name. So yeah, that's basically. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna finish this game. I need to. Doesn't matter if I'm scared or not. I just need to do this. And so I did. Was it worth it? No, it was not worth it. To be fair.
No payoff, huh?
Nah. The ending just kind of sucked for me, in my opinion. Because what they did was they wanted to make a trilogy out of this from this game, but they just completely abandoned it. And that's when the Alone in the Dark, without any titles further or whatever, popped up on the Xbox 360. So they kind of just made another reboot of that series, and they started anew. Because there was apparently 3 other games before this one, but the makers of A New Nightmare wanted to make a trilogy, and that was the start of the trilogy. I think they wanted to have more gateways with the Shadow World and all that stuff in it, but that never happened. So there's only one game. So you've got like Alone in the Dark 1, Alone in the Dark 2, and I think they're even like, I think there's a few, not even the PlayStation, even before that. So I'm not even talking about the NES. I'm actually talking about consoles before this. So it's a pretty long time ago. And then what they did is they remade all these games. And then at Alone in the Dark 3, they were like, you know what? We're going to start over because we are a different game company. Let's start over. So they started with Alone in the Dark, A New Nightmare. And then it never happened. So that's basically when it just started with the Xbox 360 with a different game company. And they decided to call it Alone in the Dark. So that's why almost nobody knows about A New Nightmare, unfortunately, which is why I'm playing it. Shameless plugin. That is why I'm playing it on my channel.
Very, very cool. I've heard of those games as well. You know, I think the reason why they changed the developer, I believe, if I'm saying this correctly, that Alone in the Dark was actually developed by Atari.
I think so, yeah. I think that's true. But I'm not completely sure.
Let's see. Yep, was done by Atari. 1992.
A long time ago.
When I was 16 years old, that's when Resident Evil came out, and that was a blockbuster game. That was pretty scary at the time. And the biggest reason why is you had the claustrophobia like we had talked about earlier in the podcast. But what made Resident Evil so special is that they didn't really market it that well. They didn't market it that much. So it was kind of like, okay, read the description on the back of the game. What the hell is this? And you go in and the game just blows your mind. So there are a lot of, not so much jump scares, but more shocks in that. There were some jump scares, like when you go into the corridor off to the right, you know, the east wing of the mansion for the first time, and the dog jumps through the window. That's a good jump scare right there. The first time you lay your eyes on one of the zombies that's eating one of your team members, that's a shock. And you're like, wow, this game is going to be something else. Of course, the voice acting was complete garbage. But for a 16-year-old, that was a pretty scary game. But I'll say the scariest game that I've ever played through, jump scare, claustrophobia, being chased wise, would be Outlast. I think that they did a great job with that, using the video camera, having the jump scares, the darkness, and just that fear of the unknown. And it's funny because I think that the creature that follows you around in Outlast, I feel like was inspired by Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, because if you remember in Resident Evil 3, when you're playing it, you know, you're actually fighting Nemesis, but Nemesis is chasing you all through Raccoon City. He is relentless with it. And that gives you a little bit of anxiety as well. So now you've got that same type of idea in Outlast, but in close quarters. It's in a mental institution. You can't run out the building and go across the street like you can in Resident Evil 3. And I think, conversely, that Resident Evil 7 was inspired in part by Outlast as well. It's same type of idea, different type of family, different storyline, more than one person chasing you around. You had the father chasing you around for the most part in Resident Evil 7, but you had other family members that you were always constantly on the lookout for. Just a lot of situations that make you very, very nervous. And I think Outlast pulled that off perfectly. Have any of you guys played Outlast?
I have not. No, I know exactly what you're talking about because I've seen many gameplay videos and everything else about it. I've read about it as well, but I've never played it myself. No.
See quite a few playthroughs of it, and they've got that Blair Witch-esque camera view down to the ground. I do like that.
Absolutely.
I did like Blair Witch. I mean, well, it was okay. It was interesting, I suppose. The concept of it, anyway. But the way they've done that, I think that's really interesting, especially the night vision and the batteries fading, and you're thinking, oh, find another battery. Find another battery. Come on, man, you can find another battery. And they don't. And they're stumbling around in pitch darkness for about 20 minutes, and you're thinking, oh, my God. This is very well done.
It's basically inspired by found footage movies, which are my favorite movies, to be fair. One of my favorite movies is Cloverfield. So it's kind of inspired by that, yeah. 100%, for sure.
Very cool. Nylet Inc. asks, favorite game franchise and why?
Obviously, I'm going to have to say Elder Scrolls, to be quite honest, because it's ones that I've always stuck with since I managed to get hold of a copy of Arena, which was oddly enough after I played Morrowind, but it was still a very good game. I did like that, and Daggerfall as well. So when there's the consistency like that, I'd have to say the Elder Scrolls franchise and not the Fallout franchise, because I did have a go at things like the Brotherhood of Steel Tactics, and it stunk. I hated it. And once you hate one vehemently in a series, it sort of lowers the level. Fallout's still brilliant, still love it, still play it anytime, any day. If my PC had run Fallout 3, I would be playing Fallout 3 right now. But if you were going to ask me for a solid one, it's going to be the Elder Scrolls.
Fair enough.
This is a very, very hard question for me. I've might have played like a couple of thousand games in total, but if I have to pick one just to talk extremely about it, that would have been The Legend of Zelda, 100%.
That's a
Secret
good
of
one.
Mana is my favorite game of all time, but if it's about its franchise, it is not. Because it's just one game, and there's a couple of Mana games that they call the series now Mana. It used to be Seiken Densetsu, but they now just called it Mana, and that's it. It's really The Legend of Zelda. And the reason for that is, what I love about The Legend of Zelda is that each single time when a new game comes out, except for maybe a couple of them, maybe 2 or 3, they try and change the gameplay of that franchise. For example, if you have seen the DS games, Some of them are remakes, and that's it, of the older ones. But there are a couple of them where they try to make it differently. So if you see the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, those two have the same gameplay style.
Hmm.
It's the exact same. But if you then all of a sudden go to Breath of the Wild, it's not, they could have done the exact same thing again, but instead they made it more open world. You can do whatever you want. Of course, there's some of these quests that you need to follow. So that side is a bit linear. But other than that, it's an open world that you can do pretty much what you want. But if you go back to, let's say, for example, the Minish Cap, that game is totally different if you talk about Link to the Past. If you put those two together, you can see similarities, but they're not the same. And this is what I really love about the franchise. They try to make the gameplay different. It's not always like if you go back for, let's say, Elder Scrolls, like Rune just mentioned, and you would go to, let's say, Morrowind, and then you go to Skyrim, and then you go to Oblivion. Most of the gameplay style, because it's first person view, is the same. So it could feel the same too, but because graphics change over time, it is not the same. And the world is, of course, a lot bigger and has more lore and has more stuff to do. But with The Legend of Zelda, they try and try and try. Nintendo tries to make the gameplay different so that they stand out from the rest. And so that every game is not every single time the same thing. Like, for example, what we have with Call of Duty, where every single game is just the same thing, except it's kind of, we rebalanced a bit more, and the graphics, some of these games are kind of the same, but eventually over time, they're like, you know what, it's time to make a different Call of Duty. And then when you play it, there are still many things that the older games had as well. I give the blame to that for it being a first person game, so there's not much that you can change with that, of course. But on the other hand, they could have at least tried something new. But usually that's not the case. It's always the same thing repeated over and over again. And that's why one of the reasons why I picked The Legend of Zelda.
That's a great answer. Bloom, what about you?
Well, I would say that even though I love the Fallout series and everything and Skyrim and stuff, but I'd say it'd have to be the Assassin's Creed ones, because I fell in love with the first one and had to have all of the games, even if they kind of were hard for me to get through because the story itself was being a little weird. I still love the story and the concept of what they're going for, and the feel of, at least the first ones, the feel of the playing it. It made me want to actually be in the game and want to actually be doing it myself, because of the way it just played through the story and the characters, and they just seemed so real. You just wanted to get in there and just be the game, and so I will always love Assassin's Creed. Even if they have flops, I will still always love it. And even if they, like on this last one with Odyssey, even though they're missing the key elements of the Assassins and the Templars, you're still getting that same, I want to be there, I want to actually experience this type story. And so I just love it. Always going to love it.
It really is all about you when it comes to this question, so you don't have to explain it much more than that. I think you tied that up perfectly. If I were to be honest here, I don't like duplicating people's answers on the podcast, obviously, but with a question like this, it really can't be helped in a lot of cases because it's personal opinion and what everybody thinks. But anybody that knows me knows that I'm right there with Runesar. It's the Elder Scrolls. I did very much enjoy Morrowind when I played it. I like ESO, but I'll tell you, home for me is right in Skyrim. And I think it's a fantastic series. I love the interaction that you can use with it. I love how every single thing you do influences the way you're looked at in the game. If you kill a chicken, you are less than dog shit in that game. So, I mean, it's, even though you're saving the world, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, but that is, I love the attitude of the NPCs. I love the interaction. I love how you can do different things and aggravate people. I love the idea of choices, the immersive gameplay, the graphics, the controls, the storylines, the side quests, the Radiant quests. That game will keep you. I've got almost 5,000 hours in Skyrim, and I'm not tired of that game. I've streamed it on my channel numerous times. It's a game or it's a franchise that has put my channel on the map to a certain extent. So I've met great people like you viewing today, great people that are on my podcast now. I met all of you through either Fallout or Skyrim, mostly Skyrim, but that is by far my go-to game. Back in 2012, I kind of fell down my stairs and caught myself, ripped my MCL in my left knee, and gave me 10 weeks on my ass. I had to be on short-term and long-term disability with work, and that's when Skyrim and I started dating, and we fell in love. And I've been playing Skyrim ever since. So it's been a fantastic experience. If you haven't played Skyrim and you're a gamer, you're only hurting yourself. So that would be my answer on that one.
Yeah, what was the song again? Dovahkiin,
Yeah.
Dovahkiin,
Dovahkiin. And of course, as we do each week, we're going to recommend our game of the week. I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one, Bloom.
Fallout 3. As everybody knows, it's a Fallout game. I just love the characters in that. I love the interaction and all the new characters. Even if I've already played it, they always seem new every time I go back to it. And the places that they have, even though they're real life places, they've made it into new, exciting every time you revisit it. So I just love going back to there and just diddy bopping around, killing mutants, talking to the characters. It's just a fun shooter. It's a fun game. Got to do it.
Yeah, Fallout 3 is actually the Fallout game that turned me on to Fallout. It's funny, I don't know if I've mentioned it. I think I've mentioned it to you guys before offline, but I bought Fallout 3 Game of the Year Edition for $7. And I played it for 10 minutes, and I was like, this game is a piece of shit, and put it on my shelf for a year. And then I got bored one day, and I popped it back in. I was probably after my knee issue, because I think, yeah, I played that after I finished Skyrim. And I was like, where's this game been all my life, except for on the shelf the last year? And it just, my attitude towards it was completely different the second time I've played it. And I was like that with Fallout 4 when that came out, too. I played that the day it came out, and then just like shelved it for 3 months. And then went back and beat the crap out of the game. But yeah, Fallout 3 is what turned me on to Bethesda hardcore. I mean, I liked Skyrim, but Fallout 4 was like, okay, you know what? This is a second Bethesda game that I've really dug into hardcore. What are some more games other than Morrowind, obviously, because I'd already tried Morrowind. But were any more of these games, that's how I was turned on to Rage, and that's how I was turned on to Doom, and it was really awesome. Rune, how about you?
I've been playing Insomnia, the Ark. It's a diesel punk sci-fi RPG, and it's set aboard this massive abandoned, semi-abandoned space station. It's its own metropolis. It has its own city complexes in, and it's very dystopian. And it's trying to explain the game without giving too much away. But a lot of the individuals who are on board have been woken up from suspended animation, and you're one of them. And the idea is to try and unravel the reason why and what is going on. As I say, it's a diesel punk game. It's beautifully done, handcrafted locations. The NPCs are complete and utter weirdos. They are very off the wall. The actual style of it's so weird. The streets, but they're within the space station, as I say. It's all Art Deco, beautifully done. There's a variety of armors, weapons you can pick up. It's very, very good. I would recommend that. That would be my game of the week, Insomnia the Ark. It's available on Steam now for $29.99, and it is well worth a look at.
It definitely sounds like an interesting game, Rune. Guy, what would your pick of the week be?
My pick of the week is Super Double Dragon on the Super Nintendo. I've plugged it in last week, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go off my entire library of games. And right now, I've been playing Super Double Dragon, and it's such a fun game to play. If you are known to Double Dragon of the past on the NES, on the Nintendo Entertainment System, I suggest you go and play that too. But for me, it's Super Double Dragon that I would, for you guys to play. I would recommend that to play because the game has an amazing soundtrack. There's only like 8 or 9 songs in the entire game, just 9 themes. But just if you start up the game, the first theme, the theme that just pops up like at the main menu, it's so good. It just makes you want to play the game. Mm-hmm. And when you start up in this casino-like area, and you have to beat the crap out of everybody that you see. Yeah, and there's all kinds of things you can do. You can be the Hulk and then smash them to bits. You can grab knives and then throw at them and they die instantly. You can grab a stick that one of them suddenly just shows up with. You could just smack with that too if you want to, and it's just a fun game to play. I really highly suggest you guys to play that for sure.
Fantastic. We'll definitely check that out. I remember playing that a long time ago, and that was a really fun game. My favorite one overall was Double Dragon 2, but I thought that Super Double Dragon was really good because there was so much time between Double Dragon 3 on the regular Nintendo and Super Double Dragon on Super Nintendo that it was a very welcomed addition to the Double Dragon franchise, which is another amazing franchise. For my pick this week, it's one that I've played over the years, one that I don't really get to play too much because it is a little bit expensive to play. It's an MMORPG. I'm talking about Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Final Fantasy XIV Online now. They originally called it Final Fantasy XIV Online. It was so terrible when it first came out that they completely scrapped the game, revamped it, changed everything around, and renamed it to A Realm Reborn. Lots of different iterations and DLC that go with it now. It is a great game. It reminds me a lot of ESO and Final Fantasy kind of combined. I think that the server is nice and solid. It's a huge game. It is a little bit pricey. It's about $12 a month to play, but it has been a fantastic paced game. It's been a great game to kill some time because I know that with the coronavirus out there we're still a little on lockdown for a little bit longer, but I will definitely share. It gives you so many different jobs that you can play in it. Like right now I'm playing as a pugilist, and I'm going to be actually doing some pre-records for the YouTube channel on Final Fantasy XIV moving forward, but you get different types of jobs. Like you could be a blacksmith, you can be a chef, you can be a fisherman, you can be a seamstress, you can do all kinds of different things. They send you on hunts. You got to go hunt down certain types of rare creatures. You've got a hunt log to move up in ranks in your given guild, which is a thaumaturge guild. You've got a pugilist guild. You've got a gladiator guild. You have all kinds of different things you can do in the game. The game keeps you so busy. It's definitely worth a look. If you have the extra money that you can go ahead and put out to do a monthly membership on that, it's definitely worth taking a look.
I would like to add something to that.
Sure.
I have also played this week Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is the American version of the game that I like, which is Mystic Quest Legends here in Europe. They are basically the same game, except they have different names. And the reason why they did that was Mystic Quest was supposed to be an American game, where Japan thought by themselves, like, I think it's time, because it's Square Enix that was behind this. They thought to themselves, like, you know what, it is time to sell stuff on the American market too, because you have never sold anything there. And they were like, yeah, I guess we're right. Yeah, we should do that. So what they've done is they basically decided to make a first Japanese RPG and sell that on the American market, and that's why it's called Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
That's awesome.
It is a spin-off game to Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
It does have Final Fantasy within the name, but it has nothing to do with Final Fantasy at all. This is also the start of Chrono Trigger, and this was also the start of the Mana series, which is, for example, Secret of Mana and all the other Mana games. So I would highly suggest for you guys to play Mystic Quest. But if you want to have the American version, then it's Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. And if you want to have the European version, then it's Mystic Quest Legends.
Good to know. And yeah, that's another great game from another amazing franchise. I remember playing those games. One of the first Super Nintendo games that I had was Final Fantasy II, which is actually Final Fantasy IV. To Gaia's point, marketing out in the US, they had different types of iterations. Final Fantasy I was Final Fantasy I in the United States as well. But Final Fantasy IV in Japan was Final Fantasy II in the United States. Final Fantasy III in the United States was Final Fantasy VI in Japan, which are two of my favorite iterations of Final Fantasy. So definitely check out the Final Fantasy franchise on the whole. Well, that's about all the time we have today for our third episode of MazCast. I want to say thank you to Gaia Legend for being our guest this week. Gaia, it was fantastic having you on here.
Thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to having you on in the future, I'm sure, if you'd like to, of course.
Oh, yeah, always. No problem.
A huge thank you again to my co-hosts Runesar and Bloomkai.
Goodbye, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you very, very soon. Good night.
Thanks for popping in and have a good night.
If you guys enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more podcasts like this on the way. Please also consider following me on Mixer. I do stream there Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Please also consider smashing that join button if you want to become a member of our YouTube channel, or consider becoming a patron on our Patreon. We are trying to grow our channel and every little bit helps. Thanks for joining, and as always, thank you for being a gamer, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a great day.